of affair which prevails in more than 136 districts out of 630 districts of India. It's not a small population that replies and therefore gets affected by it. That is one thing that has to be kept in mind. But why war? Why is it that the government of India decides to wage war, therefore obliges us to go back into the history of these struggles? You cannot just remain at the level of say, oh, let these violations that are taking place stop, or that these perpetrators be brought to justice. Whether it happens or not, that's a separate matter, because Indian Supreme Court there is a famous Supreme Court judgment in India which is called the Pathribal judgment, which has provided a third layer of immunity for the armed forces. The judgment says, and it's a very interesting judgment, both for its prose and for the kind of the eloquence with which it comes in the aid of security forces and provides legal immunity for itself. It says that it would be presumed that all soldiers and all personnel of the armed forces are working in good faith. And this presumption of good faith cannot be dislodged cannot be dislodged unless there is prima facie evidence, which shows that there is evidence to show that there is some crime that has been committed, a war crime, a crime against humanity has been committed. But in order for that magistrate to take cognizance of that matter, he requires the sanction of the central government. So what the Pathribal judgment did was, and this is a very interesting case, let me give you the historical background of this case for you to understand how repulsive the Supreme Court judgment is. Now what is Pathribal judgment? Pathribal judgment was on March 30th, if my memory serves, March 25th or 26th, on the eve of Bill Clinton's visit to India. There was a massacre that took place of Sikhs in Chhattisgarh village of South Kashmir in the district of Anantnag. 36 Sikhs were massacred. Now, who was behind it is, there are many suspects in that. Yes. Lashkar-e-Taiba and was suspected in that, as along with, according to the eyewitness statements of those survivors of the Chhattisgarh massacre, it could have been even army men or rogue elements from within the army. Now, after that, the army started searching for the so-called perpetrators of this massacre. And in the course of that, they picked up a lot of local villages. Scores of them were picked up. On 5 days after Chhattisgarh massacre, the army announced that there was an encounter in which they had killed 5 of the foreign militants who were involved in the Chhattisgarh massacre. And they also released the name of 3 of those foreign militants, gave the name as Pakistanis with the name, rank, etc., etc. Obviously, the army claimed that it had this evidence that they had collected from the encounter. Fine. In this, just after this encounter, some of these villages started protesting, and they came and complained they tried to lodge a complaint with the police saying that their kith and kin had been abducted by the army and they don't know the whereabouts of these people. So please, we like to know. And we fear that maybe those 5 foreign militants that the army claimed that it killed and were involved in Chhattisgarh could be our kith and kin who were there, so we would like. This procession was fired upon. 7 people were killed by the police and fired on these protesters who were demanding a probe into this and bringing the perpetrators to justice. Now, moved by that, and because Bill Clinton was arrived, and obviously, as you know, the Indian establishment is so very concerned about international bad press and things like that, and with Bill Clinton's arrival, they decided the magistrate or judicial magistrate order an investigation. The investigation established that the army claims are false. They found that there is reasons to believe that these people were not foreigners, that they were locals. and they asked that the DNA testing be done, etc. It's an interesting story because there are all twists and turns. Then CBI, after 2 years of this investigation and commission of inquiry that went on and things like that, finally Central Bureau of Investigation, which is supposed to be the premier investigating agency in India, was given the task of investigating the matter. They discovered that the DNA blood samples that had been taken had been fudged by the head of the Department of Pathology of the Government Medical College, Srinagar. That was the first that they were trying to already fudge to ensure that this link between local villages and those people who are buried there as foreign militants doesn't get established. So they tried to prevent it by juggling with and fudging the DNA testing. Finally, this was discovered and new blood samples were done, which established that these people were related to the family which claimed that their kith and kin had been disappeared by the army. The CBI, after an army, of course, challenged CBI's right to investigate a crime committed by them. They're saying that this was a joint police-army action. And what they were doing was only at the behest of the police, which provided them with the intelligence. They didn't know who XYZ is. Okay, that was their claim of innocence. Anyway, the CBI, finally the matter went to the Supreme Court. That is when the Supreme Court intervened to say this. So much so, then in a general court martial or in general security force court, civilians who are affected have no locus standi. They have no locus standi. Which means that if they want to intervene during the court martial, they can't. They can't come with their own lawyer and intervene and ask questions. That is denied to them. Quite apart from that, after the court martial proceedings, if they have no right to demand those documents of that court proceedings so that they can take it and move the Supreme Court. Okay? Even that door is closed because the army says civilians have no locus standi. In our court, the security forces say the same thing. Civilians who are affected, therefore, do not have any access even to an impatriable case. It's very interesting. After 12 years of all this, today the victims are fighting to get copy of this, what army calls the summary of evidence of this case. Now the reason I'm narrating this case is that it resulted in the Supreme Court judgment and it provided another layer of legal immunity, which raises a lot of issues for us.
So the case in the Supreme Court was by the people, or what exactly was it?
I'm sorry?
So can you tell us, like, what
the
was
army
case?
went in appeal against the CBI right to investigate. And they challenged. Then they challenged, I mean, this is an history
so
also.
It's army versus CBI. Again, people are...
Yeah. And the Union of India, it's interesting that the CBI was always on the side of the security forces because you can't afford to demoralize the security forces. They're so very important for the Indian nation state, please remember. In fact, there is a Supreme Court judgment in a very famous case called Masooda Parveen case, where the Supreme Court refused to give ex gratia payment of rupees 50,000, not even $1,000. 50,000 rupees would be how many dollars? Less than $800?
Yes.
They didn't refuse to give even $800 to the wife of a civilian victim who was killed, bombed actually by the army. And she approached the Supreme Court. She didn't go to the lower court. She didn't go to the high court. She went straight to the Supreme Court, saying that I have 2 small children. All I want is rupees 50,000 as ex gratia payment to bring up my kids. The army said, the Supreme Court in a famous judgment says that we cannot do that because this would demoralize the security forces. So demoralization of the security forces is a very important part. And today we have gone a step further. For the first time we have declared, the government of India has declared, that any soldier who dies fighting his own people would be considered a martyr, exactly like an army soldier fighting on the border against an enemy. So if you fight against your own people who are reduced to enemy, you can become a shaheed and a martyr and be entitled to a whole lot of privileges and things like that. The reason I'm bringing all this up is to just point out that because of our unwillingness to address the issue of war. We do not understand that the wars that are taking place, what is happening in those places. And just because we abhor war, we don't even want to delve into this whole armed conflict that is going on, and therefore don't even want to go into the background as to what first started, what lies behind it. And that is where I want to come in. There are multiple wars that are going on, of course, Manipur, Kashmir, and each one, if you go to the history, you will understand. In 1949, Manipur was the next. It was